Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. That is Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. I'm your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to this FASD Awareness Month episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, where we are here to encourage and equip you for your parenting journey. As a mom myself of 8, 5 through adoption, including 2 diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, I know the struggles that come with raising children with trauma histories and prenatal exposure to alcohol and other substances. And my hope is that you will find this podcast an invaluable resource for your parenting journey, whether you are an adoptive parent, a foster parent, or a kinship caregiver. This podcast is one that I wish I had many, many years ago when I started out on this journey and there was not a whole lot available to us. So we're grateful to be a resource to you. Speaking of resources, shameless plug for my upcoming devotional, Soul Care Saturday, 52 devotions for foster and adoptive moms. Will be releasing sometime in November, probably for Adoption Month. So stay tuned to this podcast and our website and socials so that you won't miss a thing when we're about ready to release that. And I'm also excited to announce that our website, the Justice for Orphans website, is all updated and up and running. So it's now super simple for you to find everything that you are looking for. You just go to justicefororphansny.org. Of course, there's a link in the show notes. And right there on the homepage, you will see where it says the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. And when you click that, it will take you to a whole section that's going to feel like a separate website, but it's not. But it is where everything resides that you need as resources, from this podcast to our FASD training, other resources for FASD, if you need some parent coaching, as well as our Hope for the FASD Journey support group and my blog. Everything is all in one place. So I hope that you will check that out. Also, be sure to subscribe to our social media pages. We are on Facebook as the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and we are on Instagram as at AFC_journey. So like us, follow us, find us there and connect. Always love to be able to do that. And again, speaking of connecting, this fall, I will be in Houston, Texas for the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit, the CAFO Summit, October 1st through 3rd. I will be leading a breakout session entitled Hope Beyond Frustration, Incremental Growth Through Simple and Consistent Practices. We're going to focus on FASD, of course, and I'm also hosting a meetup room. So if you are a parent or caregiver of somebody with an FASD, you can join us in a designated room. You'd have to check the CAFO website. I don't know if they've assigned rooms yet or not, but it's just a time, an hour, I think it's an hour and 15 minutes where we can meet up, connect, have some fellowship and encourage one another there. And then I will also be at the Replanted Conference in Chicago on October 23rd through 25th, where I will be leading a workshop called Wired Differently, Understanding FASD Trauma and the Brain. And I will have an exhibitor table at both CAFO and Replanted. So if you go, which I highly recommend that you get out to one of these this fall, you can stop by my booth and we can chat and take a selfie, and you can grab some resources and a chance to win a free copy of my upcoming devotional that I mentioned earlier. And the links to both Replanted and CAFO are in the show notes. So if you want to check those out, you can just scroll down and look for those there. So Now, to our FASD Awareness Month guest. Today, I'm excited to welcome a fellow adopted mom, Michelle Trager. Michelle is a parent of 4 school-age kids through both adoption and birth. She is a passionate advocate for children and young adults with special needs, particularly in raising awareness about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders among policymakers, educators, mental health professionals, the justice system, and caregivers and families. Michelle's personal and professional experiences have equipped her with a unique perspective on the challenges faced by vulnerable populations. With experience in youth crisis, foster placement stabilization, community mental health, and school social work, Michelle developed a deep understanding of the intersectionality of various support systems. As a parent navigating these systems, she has firsthand knowledge of their complexities and frequent shortcomings. She is a certified facilitator of the Facets neurobehavioral model and is trained in trust-based relational intervention, TBRI. Additionally, she completed an intensive caregiver training program focused on FASD through Jeff Noble and served as a parent mentor to others in that community. Michelle contributed to policy development as a member of the Advancing Transformations in Juvenile Justice Committee and continues to participate on the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice Family Advisory Committee. She provided testimony at the Illinois Behavioral and Mental Health Committee hearing in 2021 and remains a vocal advocate for addressing the mental and behavioral health crisis for children and young adults in Illinois, including those with severe disabilities who lack resources. She has presented several times for the Illinois Council for Children and Behavioral Disorders Winter Conference, sharing her expertise on FASD. In July of 2023, she was invited to join Congresswoman Lauren Underwood's Community Advisory Council, where she continues to bring information to and advocate for her community. Michelle holds a bachelor's in psychology from the University of Notre Dame and a master's in social work with social work school certification from Aurora University. She is actively engaged in the Chicago area FASD parent support community, providing legislative updates and organizing advocacy efforts, including those related to the proposed Federal Bipartisan Support Act, which includes crucial language addressing FASD programs. She is a busy mom, and somehow she found the time to be with us today. Please welcome Michelle Trager. Hey, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled because I know we've connected on other meetings, I think through Facets, maybe even FASD United. So it's great to have you finally on the show and get to hear your story and have our listeners get to know you, because I know you're super busy and I love all of the things that you are doing on behalf of the FASD community.
Thanks.
Incredible work.
Thank you.
So, but I'd love to start kind of at the beginning on how you got here with all that you're doing. And I know you have one adopted son, is that right? So
Yes.
how did adoption come into your story?
So my husband and I, it's kind of interesting because even when we were dating before we were engaged, we were kind of talking about, feeling out like, okay, how do you feel about kids? How do you feel about kids? And it was interesting because both of us always had in our mind that we wanted to be parents through adoption at some point. I think maybe because both of us grew up with friends who had been adopted, and we just felt positive about that and sort of felt a calling to do that. So what we didn't know was that there would be a lot of fertility struggles. So in our minds, when we were young, we thought, okay, we'll have a couple children through birth and then we'll adopt. And we actually ended up doing the reverse. So I was still, what they considered young enough when we started the fertility process. But we didn't want to keep going and keep going and keep going with we weren't having any success, and we knew that adoption was something we were open to anyway. So we kind of put a pause on that, the medical part. We went back to it later and we decided, yeah, let's go ahead with adoption. And even that was the journey of meeting with some domestic agencies and seeing what that was like, and then talking about, okay, is international something that we were interested in, and where do you go from there? So we ultimately ended up going with Russia. And that was back in, we were very fast. We did the paperwork in 2006 in the second half of it. And I was taking a little break from social work at the time. So I just put everything into doing that paperwork, getting everything done that we needed to. And almost as soon as we had it turned into the agency, they were ready with a referral. From the time we started to the time we brought him home was 6 months, which is very quick
Wow.
when you're doing an
Yeah.
any kind of adoption, but especially international, it was
Yeah.
really quick. So we visited the first time in December, because Russia is at least 2 trips. Now, of course, unfortunately, that program is
Yeah.
closed. But sometimes it was 3 trips, just because of the way their system works. But we were 2 trips. We were December of 06. And then when we went back in January of 07, that's when we went to court and got to bring him home without having to stay in the country like an extra 2 weeks that they sometimes did.
Wow. So we were similar stories as far as the timeline. We adopted from Ukraine.
Right.
And I believe we brought our kids home actually. Well, the first 3 came home in January of '06.
Oh,
So was it January of '06 or '07? I think, gosh, because we were there since November. So the calendar year changed. So I'm always like a little
yeah.
fuzzy. I have to always go back and look at the calendar. But we brought home 3 and then went back in 2010 to bring home the youngest sibling out of the 4. And he's the one that started us on our awareness journey to FASD. While some of the others did have it as well, we just didn't know until the younger one came home because he was the Powerball, so to speak.
Right.
So, gosh, so how old was your son when you brought him home from Russia?
He was 14 months.
Wow.
And it was really interesting because when we saw him in December, he was not yet walking. And when we came back in January, just in that month time, he was starting to, sort of slide his feet along the floor and try walking. And he got 4 more teeth during that month too.
Wow.
So it was like, oh gosh, I'm glad that we got him as soon as we did, even though it was 14 months, because like all this development was already happening just in that short time.
Yeah. So any inkling at that point that he may have been prenatally exposed?
No, and we did all the things that you're supposed to do, like have a doctor here, review the file. It's probably similar in Ukraine. There just isn't that much information. And in
Mhm.
Russia, it's crazy because they would diagnose almost every child that were in the baby houses. I might get the name wrong, but it was like with encephalopathy. They would diagnose
Yeah.
every kid with that, because to them, every child who'd endured birth was traumatized and had brain trauma. So if you were over here looking at that, you would say, oh, this child might have cerebral palsy, but you had to sort of know, no, they just diagnosed every child with that. And I think they might have put like a developmental delay. But our son actually, he was pretty close to hitting the developmental milestones early on. So when you take into account, okay, he probably didn't have enough stimulation and was in that orphanage setting, you would expect a delay. But even with that, he was pretty close to the typical developmental milestones. And we actually used quite a bit of sign language because we weren't sure what he would understand. If he understood any Russian, would he respond to that? Would he understand English? So the sign language, I think, helped with his English development and just speaking in general. And I think we were just watching more, instead of those developmental pieces, we were watching more for the attachment. That
Mhm.
was where, and me with a social work background, that was really my focus at the time. Like, how are we bonding? How are we really, intentionally creating that attachment? And how is that process coming along? And I can say, because he was very social and he would sort of go to anybody. Even when we were traveling back home and we had a layover in De Gaulle airport, it's like, oh, he almost walked off with another woman, because he didn't know us yet, obviously. But we were in a class, there's a nationwide program, it's called Music Together, and it's really good. Yes, it's good about teaching tone and rhythm and movement at a very, very young age, like 8 months up. but it's really good for bonding parents and kids. And so we went to this class, and it was really interesting, because there were times when the kids would sort of be in the middle and the moms would circle around. And I always knew that he belonged to me. But there was one time a few months in, we went to this class and the moms made a circle and we were not in our starting positions when the music stopped. And he actually was looking around and he had a little bit of a scared look on his face. But to me, I was overjoyed because
Mhm.
I knew that he was looking for me specifically. At that
Mhm.
moment, I knew he knows that I belong to him.
Mhm.
And so that, and it was interesting too, because some of the other moms in the class had commented that they had seen sort of that growth in that bonding since we had started the class. So, it's funny, the moments that stick in your mind along that
Yeah.
journey. So that's what we were really focused on. And then, when he sort of got to preschool age, I think he had done like park district soccer, and the range of normal is so wide at that age. But
Mhm.
then the coaches would come up to us and say, can he hear okay? Because we call his name and he doesn't respond. Is he here? And he did not have any hearing issues. So even in that wide range of what's considered, quote, normal, we knew he was a little bit outside that. And we just thought, oh, maybe that's not for him. But we also knew, obviously, coming from that background, there's possibly issues sensory, right, from not getting
Mhm.
enough stimulation. And so needing that movement, sensory things could be bothering him. We knew that. So when he first started preschool in the town that we were living in, the occupational therapist said, I want to do a referral and come in and talk about if we need to make a plan for him. Great. This is, I wanted the support early on. Well, then we moved because I was pregnant with twins and we needed to move to a town where we could get a bigger house without spending a ton more money. So we moved to a new town. And he was able to get into the preschool, our early learning center in our district right away. But it was crazy. He had no issues. They saw nothing for that entire year before he went into kindergarten. And part of it was because it was only 2.5 hours and he
Mhm.
managed then, and he had a couple really good friends, and he just was not throwing up any flags for them. So we're going to enter kindergarten and now we're going into full day, but now I can see some of those, behaviors ratcheting up. So I got him into occupational therapy before he even started kindergarten to help us with some of those things. And I actually had his kindergarten teacher and the special ed coordinator at the beginning of the year had a meeting with them and said, look, because my background as a school social worker, I knew the process. I said, you're going to be in case study with my child by November, evaluating him for IEP. And sure enough, they were. And the principal would even say, like, he's running all over. I have to take, many times he has to be down in the office. And, a lot of times where if I knew then what I do now, I wouldn't have done it when it was come pick your child up early. Even when he got to be in second grade and he had the IEP in place, and they would say, you had to come pick him up early because he's just out of control. And now I've got twin girls. So I've got a toddler in each hand going to pick up my son early. And sometimes they say, oh, but before you go, we want to show you what he did in the classroom. We want to show you the destruction he wrought that he's going to have to come back and pick up. So, that's sort of the very early on. And I had no idea about FASD. This is what I always say is so, in hindsight, like, it's upsetting to me, but it also helps me relate to people. I have a master's in social work. I didn't know about FASD, like what that really meant, what it looked like. I had sort of the overall, full fetal alcohol syndrome. And usually those are the facial features, so you can more easily recognize that. But when you don't have that, you say, well, what's going on? Is it sensory? Is it ADHD? Some of the other things that they might say for real young kids. And so I didn't know. And I think that helps me relate sometimes when I'm talking to other professionals. Like, don't feel bad because I happen to know they're still not taught about it.
Yeah.
20 something years later, they're still not taught about it in these college courses and these grad school courses where you're absolutely going to be working with a population where a high percentage probably does have some prenatal alcohol exposure. So it helps me say, I didn't know myself.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if you don't know, but let's work on that. Let's change that.
Yeah. And in turn, so many parents don't know. And if they come through foster care, it's not necessarily taught in foster parent training. And we didn't do foster care, but adopting internationally. We do have a daughter through kinship. We have three bios, but a daughter through kinship, way back in 1999. And the way she came to us, she didn't end up going into foster care. So we didn't have any training, right? So we didn't know anything about trauma, first of all,
Mhm,
and we
mhm.
didn't know anything about prenatal exposure, nor would we have ever thought that that would be something we would need to know. And
Right.
then, as time went on and we adopted our kids internationally, by then I did read a book about attachment. And then I did read a book about or I did a little online research about fetal alcohol syndrome because somebody had said to me, oh, adopting from Eastern Europe, the kids usually have that. So I
Mhm.
read a little bit. It was scary. And I thought, well,
Yes.
that's not going to happen to us.
Yeah.
And crazy enough, when the first three kids came home, they were 9, 7, and 3.
Wow.
And there were like a lot of crazy things, the language, trying to figure out education, a lot of medical stuff and dental stuff and
Mhm.
all of that. But they sort of just clicked into our family in a way that we thought we knew what we were doing, right? So we were
Yes.
lulled
Yes.
into thinking, oh, we got this.
Right.
Um, but then it was like, 3 years later, travel back to Ukraine to get the youngest, who by that time was 5. And the second we met him in the orphanage, we were like, oh, we are not equipped to handle this. Like, we think
Wow.
that this FAS thing might be coming into play here. Like, this child is like, how are we even going to get him home on an airplane? So that started our journey. And then he got diagnosed, and then his brother, who was the next one older, got diagnosed as well. And looking back now, I feel like probably a couple of the other kids are, somewhere
On
on
that
the
spectrum.
spectrum, but
Yeah.
we wouldn't have known because it was the youngest one, had so many of the behavioral things. It couldn't
Right.
be missed, right? It couldn't be ignored. Um, and it was just so challenging. We pursued help, and they got a diagnosis. And interestingly enough, our two boys, the youngest two, had the facial features, and it wasn't in their medical records, but actually in the court decree. We had all their court information. The two older kids had been with the biological parents until they were like 3 and 5, and then they were sort of abandoned. And court documents, reading through those, it was translated that the parents abused alcoholic drinks. So that was in, court records for termination of parental rights and that kind of thing. So I found it in there afterward, but just so interesting how, even when you get like a developmental pediatrician diagnosed our boys, they were 6 and 8, but it was like they were diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome and ADHD, and they handed us a brochure on or a paper on ADHD, and that was it. There was nothing.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that was part of it too for us. They had said, well, if you know that the parental rights were terminated, that's like a red flag for possible, alcohol or drug use, right? But that wasn't the case. Our son's birth mother was really young, like around 20, and she had surrendered upon birth. So, that was one less red flag plus the young age. So again, things that we thought, oh, well, we got lucky, we're okay. We have some other things, that just are part of that situation. Um, but yeah, so we had stopped thinking that for years, had stopped thinking that along those lines of prenatal exposure.
Yeah. So by the time he hit school, though, now he's in full-time kindergarten. What
Yeah.
happened? What
And
happened
then
next?
and then, like I said, second grade, a lot of behaviors um and interesting, I would say most of elementary, it was always much tougher at school than at home. So, and again, this was where I didn't know better. And I had myself been trained on, working with kids with behaviors at school. And it's the points and the levels and the stickers and the rewards and the consequences and the charts. And so, we're trying to be good parents, and we're checking that point sheet every night. And, oh, if you got this many points at school, then you get to do this at home. And, for so many days, you didn't get this minimum level of points. So you don't get to play Roblox. And it would go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we would say, don't you want to play Roblox? And he would say, of course I do. And I would say, well, if you did, you would, try to do a little. But now I know better. And I'm so, upset with myself at the time because that wasn't helpful. He wasn't going to learn from it because his brain didn't function that way. And he meant it when he said, yes, he wanted to play Roblox. But it just wasn't the right kind of support or accommodations. And so it was also interesting because he had kind of in sync with the time changes. Usually when the school year started, you think, oh, you're transitioning from summer to school, that's going to be rough. But actually, he was pretty good at the beginning of the school years. And then once we hit that time change in late October, it's like his behavior started to go deteriorate. And it would sort of bottom out at January, February. And it would be, I could set, like if I didn't know the date, as soon as he started to have, it was very noticeable and dramatic, April 15th. Like that's when he climbed out of that hole, and suddenly we're back to earning almost all of our points every day. So we couldn't get to the bottom of that, like what was the change, what was going on, and how can we, if it is the time change, how do we work with that? But it would go on for months. And unfortunately, that's the majority of the school year, between sort of late October and mid-April. That's most of the school year right there. So that part was difficult. And we were trying a lot of interventions at that time. We went to see a sleep doctor because a lot of times kids who are on the FA spectrum have some sleep issues. So we did a sleep study, and the doctor, who I think was Eastern European herself, she said, she thought it was restless legs. So a common thing they prescribe is extra iron, because that can help them sleep better. So we were doing that, for like maybe a year. We were doing the elimination diets, because that was a big thing too. Like, oh, well, a lot of times if kids are sensitive to dairy, then that can contribute and make their behaviors go kind of bonkers. So we eliminate dairy for, I don't know, well over a year. Then we threw in the soy with that. So that together, that was a year. Then toward the last 4 months of that, we were doing gluten-free on top of it. And the whole time we're doing no dyes, no preservatives, all of it, which we had tried to have pretty clean food for the kids anyway, like with the dyes and preservatives. But then we were just doing so much that we were taking out and not seeing any change from that, no positive change from that, and trying different supplements through our pediatrician. So finally, by the time we hit 4th grade, because my goal was, he was so small and underweight, I really wanted to keep him off meds as long as possible if we could. So 4th grade is when we finally went to a psychiatrist, and we went to Lurie Children's, which is like this famous children's hospital in Chicago that's supposed to be the best. And this is what I can't really get my mind around still. They had his birth history, his adoption history, and what country he came from in his records. And we still have, a resident doctor up there with a flow chart explaining how they treat ADHD. And we just thought, no, we could do that out where we live. We didn't have to come into the city for that. And that's all that you have to offer us? Yes. So then pediatrician said, well, here's this other psychiatrist. And he said, I really think there's something biological. And that made sense to us, because we had the OT and we were sort of looking at all the diet stuff, and we got the sleep stuff handled. And we just felt like there was always a piece of the puzzle that was missing. So this psychiatrist actually did prescribe some mood stabilizers. And we had tried some stimulants here and there, but the stimulants just really resulted in an increase in aggression for our son. So he could never stay on those long. But this particular psychiatrist is very, very focused on Lyme disease, and to the point that he thinks almost everybody's had it and been exposed. And, we did the tests that you normally do, and those didn't reveal anything. And he said, no, you have to do these more sensitive tests that go to Germany. And those were even sort of borderline, but he really felt like we should treat for it. So now we're doing a course of antibiotics, a long course for it. And then we're doing a course of supplements for it. And we're still not seeing anything. And he said, well, the next step would be to have this oxygen therapy via IV, and it's $18,000.
Wow.
And it's every day for 90 minutes. And this office was already more than an hour from our house. So we talked to the pediatrician, and interestingly, during that time, but I still wasn't putting all the pieces together, she had done a sample where you collect saliva from an individual at 4 points during the day. And then you can test for neurotransmitters. And his GABA, G-A-B-A neurotransmitter came back really low. She said, this is the lowest I've ever seen in a human being. And I was reading about it, and I said, oh, interesting. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So that means it's supposed to calm down your nervous system. It's supposed to help with impulse control. And my son had a very low level of it. So that sort of made sense. And I think he was on gabapentin, which is actually a medication they use for like seizures. So he was on that for a little while, but we still weren't seeing a lot of, you know, results from that. And then just his cortisol level was a little bit off. And we know that for people on the fetal alcohol spectrum, a lot of times their cortisol, which you sort of need to be high right when you get up in the morning to help you get going, it's delayed and it comes out later in the day. And so that's throwing off their nervous system too. And so his was a little bit off in terms of when the peak should be. And then when he's coming back down, it took a little longer than when you're supposed to be getting ready for bed and all of that stuff. So she said, well, let's try. And now we're in junior high, and now we are seeing more things at home. And there's, you know, unsafe behaviors, and we have 3 younger daughters at this point. And in junior high, I really just feel like there was a point where the hormones of puberty took everything in his brain that wasn't wired correctly and magnified it 1,000 times. I really feel that. And his school tried so hard because he was mostly in general ed classes this whole time. He was not in a self-contained room. He had, you know, the EDBD program and supports for that and a behavior intervention plan. But as is often the case, you know, the IQ is in the typical range. So he could do the work, you know, the content was at his level, and he was actually good at some of the things. And he was actually in elementary drawn to the kids who were the most successful in his classroom. So the kids that were motivated, those were his friends in elementary, all positive. That's all, you know, a positive thing. But he gets to junior high, and at this point we're still doing OT because that's the only thing along this whole journey that has seemed to be beneficial to us, you know. And she was really flexible, and okay, this is what's going on with him now, so what can we do? What is she going to do in the office to help, and what can she give us to take back with us that would support some of those needs? And you could tell in times of anxiety for him, whoa, he really needed to do the thing where you go on a swing and then crash into the mats over and over and over and over again. And you could see even that intensity was starting to ramp up at that stage in junior high too. So the school tried really hard to support him, and he just was becoming a danger to himself and to the other students at that time. So he went to the therapeutic day school that we had within our district, but he was only there 2 weeks. And during that time, we had been sent to a different neuropsychiatrist, and he never even met with our son. He had his file, his big massive file at this point, and he met with my husband and I, and he looked through it, and he said, and it was just the way that he said it. He said, your son's brain did not evolve properly. And I thought about it, and I thought, brain did not evolve properly, adopted from Russia. Oh, this thing that I thought we were clear of all along might be the missing piece of this puzzle. So now I am diving into FASD and all these boxes. Check, 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 check. It really made a lot of sense. And in talking with his OT, she said, yeah, I think that I agree. I think that this probably makes sense. And you know, we were trying all the things. So he had a traditional talk therapist at that time. And he said, yeah, he said, because I think there is something, because we're not making any progress. And it's been a couple of years now. And so at that point, the reason he was only at that school for 2 weeks is because he ended up having to go into the legal system because he had been aggressive towards staff there. And at that time, there had been some things at home too. And so the state's attorney said, I'm going to do charges from that too. And she really wasn't trying to be punitive, because at the beginning, before she was sick and tired of it all, she was quite compassionate. And so she was trying to use that to find ways to get him some help. And so he was in detention for a couple months. And then they said, he can't be at your house because we're concerned about safety. But if there's somewhere else he could be while we're waiting to find a place. And fortunately, my parents live about an hour away. So he was able to stay with them. And my husband and I would take turns going down to visit and sort of like give my parents a break. And then I was also during that time able to schedule his evaluation at Children's Research Triangle in Chicago. And this was specifically for, is there FASD going on?
Mm-hmm.
And we had a great evaluator. We actually took a whole day and then another half day because she wanted to get the results of some of the things she tested the first day and then do some more in depth with it. So we did that. And, you know, I think part of the issue in our country is the diagnostic criteria for FASD.
Yeah.
And so something that seems so obvious, especially given his birth history, he still does not have that diagnosis. And it's because if you don't have the 3 facial features that measure within that specific range, then you don't get the diagnosis unless you have confirmation from the birth mother. And we had no records, no confirmation anywhere that there had been alcohol consumption. And he had one of the facial features that was in the needed range. The other thing that's difficult too is if you're diagnosing at those later ages is that sometimes the facial features change. So a child who is young may more obviously have those specific facial features, but they can change and sort of grow out of them as they get older. And by this point, he's 13. So it's frustrating because a lot of times people want to take that 60-page report and just flip to the back and look at the DSM. And certainly he's got some mental health diagnoses there. But I just would always implore them, please read the report, because the test results and the description of them and the narrative on nearly every single page would say things like, these results are reflective and common for somebody who had prenatal alcohol exposure. This profile is common for people who are on the FA spectrum, like nearly every single page. And our evaluator believed that this was in fact the case, but ethically she has to go by what the criteria are,
right,
and couldn't give the diagnosis. So I still, you know, part of it in Illinois, and I'm sure in New York, I think it's very similar. It's not like having that FASD diagnosis gets you any other services. It's not recognized as a disability. You don't get any services with the diagnosis anyway. But I felt it was really helpful because it sort of validated the things we were seeing. And it really pinpointed, here's where his strengths are. Here are the areas that it's not just me saying it, it's objective data showing these are the areas where he has difficulty. But again, even with that objective data, you know, presenting it to the court, they don't really care so much.
Yeah. So before we get into the whole court part of it, just for our listeners who might not be so familiar with FASD and the symptoms, so just kind of give us a list of some of those things that you now know are symptoms of FASD, but at the time, you know, they were just kind of pieces to the puzzle.
Right. So one of the things that came back for him was impaired processing speed and very impaired working memory. So, you know, thinking back, these things would make a lot of sense because when he was younger, I would say something to him and he would say, huh? And so I would repeat it. And halfway through my repeating it, I didn't even have to finish it. He would answer me. I would say, why do you do that? You always automatically say, huh? But then you answer me before I've even repeated it entirely. Well, now I know it was that slowed processing speed. He was processing what I said. He understood it. He just needed a few extra seconds and then he would answer me. And the short-term working memory, you know, you try all these tricks like, okay, gosh, he would try, well, I'm gonna remember this by writing it down on this piece of paper. But 10 seconds after you've left the room, where is that piece of paper? You know? So it's like strategy upon strategy upon strategy. And when you have no working memory, that's not gonna be useful. Impulse control, definitely. Connecting consequences to actions, that's a big one. And you know, some confabulation, which is in there, which is where you think if you don't know better, you just say, oh, they lie to me all the time, which there could be some intentional lying, but there's also their brain trying to fill in gaps.
Yep.
So they're sort of filling it in and making up things. And a lot of times it will be based on what they think you want to hear. because they can recognize the context of the situation, or they're used to routines of the situation. So they might just make up what they think you want to hear, because they're trying to fill in those gaps. And one thing I think was really interesting, there is a test called the Iowa gambling test. And that was not one of the tests on my sons, but it was a similar one. It was called the Wisconsin card sort test. And what is really interesting about this test, like the Iowa gambling test, is it's sort of a game situation, but it's set up so you would feel like it were high stakes with money if you were playing this game. And I believe originally it was ages 9 to 18. And as you're playing this game, you get feedback as to how you're doing. And what they found was the control group, that is the kids who didn't have a diagnosis of FASD, they would adjust their behavior in response to the feedback they were getting. The kids who were on the FA spectrum did not learn from that feedback, did not adjust their behavior, continued doing whatever it was they were doing. And also what's interesting is as that age gap, the gap widened in their success as the ages continued. So they were closer together, the control group and the FASD group, when they were younger. And as the ages got older and they got closer to adulthood, that gap widened even more. So again, the control group responding to the feedback, and the kids on the FA spectrum not adjusting their behavior in response to that feedback. And that made a lot of sense, because that was a lot of my son, at school and at home, trying to correct the behaviors and not being able to. And unfortunately, I think that is one of the things that absolutely gets interpreted as willful, deliberate behavior and defiance. But there's objective data here, it's their brain that they're not able to adjust without some support. And also just time, that's the thing. So what you're expecting out of maybe a neurotypical 13, 14-year-old in some instances is maybe not the expectation you have for somebody who's neurodivergent. So,
Right.
So I think those kinds of things, and really interestingly, this is something I've heard from a lot of parents. A lot of our kids on the spectrum are really defensive about cleaning their room and about hygiene. And that's definitely, things that we encounter, and really defensive. Don't touch my stuff, to the point where he would get physical with us. And we would try all kinds of things. We would say just 3 things: clothes in the hamper, papers in recycling, wrappers in the trash. And we would even divide the bedroom into quadrants so that we're not overwhelmed with all this visual stimuli. We're really trying to break it down. And that was always still a big fight, and a lot of defensiveness with him. So setting goals and then seeing that through, sticking with them and understanding, I would say there was, some grandiosity, and it's like, you want to support and say like, oh yeah, that's a great goal. But when you break it down to all the steps necessary to get there, some of those things are really long journeys. And, he just, and I think some of that is age too, not all younger kids are going to stick with something that takes a long time to get to where they want to go anyway. But I think that's more so with our youth who are on the spectrum, is that setting a goal and then knowing how to get the step by step to actually reach it. And then it becomes really frustrating for them.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned in your story, the sugar.
Yeah. One day when he was young, and so we knew he was always, and interestingly, because he doesn't have that now, and when he was young, he really wanted sweets so much. And one day we went up to his room and found just a bag of granulated sugar with a big spoon stuck in it. And we didn't even realize how many days had that been up there. It was halfway gone. I don't know how full it was when he took it in the first place, but just that intense sugar craving. And I, and again, I'm connecting in my head, like, oh, okay, if you're exposed to alcohol prenatally, there is that connection with alcohol and sugar. And maybe that was part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So many common symptoms there of FASD. And now we know, especially being facilitators of the facets neurobehavioral model, accommodations, right? But when you don't know that that's what's going on and it looks like willful defiance and disobedience, then we're issuing the consequences and we want to do the behavior charts and those stickers and all of that. None of it works, like you said. And then secondary behaviors, symptoms can present. So, and you kind of were at that point, it sounds like, because there was aggression and frustration and anger. So kind of take us there a little bit now.
Yeah. So there was, like I said, I feel like those hormones of puberty just sort of magnified the connections that weren't connected properly, but also, like you said, I think it magnified the frustration and the stress that he felt. And so we're seeing that more in school. He goes to the therapeutic day school. That's when we finally go, aha, FASD, and just go into that rabbit hole, just everything we can find. And we can't find anything that says, nope, this totally doesn't make sense. Everything we find is like, okay. And like you said, there are some of the books out there and you read them and they're really scary, so we're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Where do we go? And at the same time, now we, unfortunately, I don't know if we could have done anything differently. I often have time travel fantasies where I go back in time and I'm able to stop some of these most severe things that led to the tertiary symptoms because, I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's not like we were terrible parents. We weren't really hardcore about these behavior charts. We were pretty flexible because we knew there was something, but not quite enough. We didn't know quite enough. And so now we're into the tertiary systems. We're into the legal system. And like I said, he was living with my parents, and then the county had found a place for him. He was there like 3 days, and in Illinois, there's no locked facilities. So he went running off down the rural highway. And so, nope, that's a safety risk. So now you're back to detention. And of course, that's seen as a deliberate, willful elopement.
Mm-hmm.
So now he was in detention. And this is, I think, I can only imagine for him. I know for me, I have a lot of trauma around this time in our family's life because he was in detention for like 10 months. And when you have a neurotypical brain, to be in a place like that, even though we had a good relationship with the staff, to have a neurotypical brain, a brain that functions differently, and to be in that kind of setting, it's no wonder he self-harmed like 10 times at least. Mm-hmm. And he would go to the ER, and because of just the shortage of mental health resources and because of some of his aggressive behaviors or unsafe behaviors, an inpatient unit would say, no, we're not going to take him. So then he would get prescribed something and go back to detention. Sometimes he went to the ER twice in one night because he would go back and self-harm again. Wow. And so this whole time we had applied for funding through the mental health stream in Illinois. And I think I broke records because I got all the records we needed within like 3 weeks, 3-4 weeks. And so we got approved, and then you have to say, okay, well, what do you have for residential treatment placement that's available? And they didn't have anything because, again, a lot of the places won't take specific behaviors. And a lot of places didn't have openings. And so then our school district was also looking at the time, and they couldn't find anything. So now we're coming, he's still in detention. We're visiting twice a week, which is what you're allowed. And now we get into 2020.
COVID.
Now it's the pandemic.
Yeah.
So most of those residential places, their waiting list isn't going anywhere. It's not moving. And now we can't even go see him in person. So now we're only doing video chats. And they got to the point where they didn't even take him to the ER because nothing ever came of that. One time an inpatient unit took him in Chicago. I think that hospital is shut down now. And all they did was manage, in quotes, his symptoms with Haldol and Thorazine. And, those are the images that stick in your head when you see your son unable to walk on his own because he's so heavily sedated, and that people are on either side of him, dragging him along. And then he went right back to detention. And sure enough, that night he was back in the ER because he self-harmed again. And so, finally the judge got sick of it and said, we need to adjudicate because no placement's been found. It's been this long. And adjudicate means they have to deliver a verdict. And in our case, send the youth on to what in our state is the Department of Juvenile Justice. But it used to be just the Department of Corrections, but for youth. And this is what we were terrified of.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because even before he was moved to a facility, the head psychologist called and he said, Michelle, we've been and talked to your son, and we want you to know our goal is not to have him here. We're going to try and stabilize his mental health, and we're going to move him to a residential through our program as soon as we can. And so it was still a few months, but that's absolutely what happened and how he finally was able to find a residential placement. And then during that time, the pandemic ramped up again. So we went through another period where there were many months that we weren't allowed to go see him in person. And when I totaled it up at one point, because he did an out of state placement for like 5 months at one point too, there's like 12 months of his adolescence where I didn't get to see him in person, you know, the early adolescent part, like under 15. So, so like I said, that's a lot of trauma that's still in there for me. I can only imagine how it is for him who lived through it. So yeah, so he's been in a few residentials, and some of that is because when he was done with the juvenile justice, he hadn't actually completed the whole treatment program at that residential. And our school district said, we'll pick it up because we've been looking for a residential for this, you know, juvenile justice is done paying for it. We'll pick it up because we've been looking for a place for so long, and he has this place. But they said at the residential, no, we don't want to do it if he's not under the oversight of juvenile justice anymore. And he would have to apply to get into one of our other programs. And there's a 6-month waiting list for that, even though he's already there. And this was a place where they have 100 youth who are in the custody of DCFS. So, and then a few who were juvenile justice or funded through their schools, but most are there through DCFS. And, you know, the frustrating part was trying to talk to them about FASD. They just had no interest in hearing it. He had a therapist, and I know not every therapist is going to be great. And some are new and some need supervision, but this person was really incompetent to the point that if I knew if she had a license and was practicing, I'd probably report, because there was a lot of stuff going on. But one of the things that she said to my son was, you don't have FASD, your parents are just codependent. And that was, yeah. And that was like a little bit damaging to our relationship for a while. And I really had to have faith that we were going to be okay and come back from that. And we did, but I just said, she cannot have contact with him anymore. I have given you the report. What makes you think that you know better than this neuropsychologist who, even if you don't have the FASD diagnosis, you can see all of these things in the report that show this brain function. Why would you tell him that? And so that was very disappointing. And then other people did not want to hear about it. And one of the psychiatrists said, well, so what if it is? What will we do differently? And I said, well, actually, the meds you're prescribing him, because I was looking at the algorithm by Dr. Mella at that time. Yeah. I said, actually, the meds that you're prescribing do seem spot on. He said, exactly. I said, but the point is, the way that they're working therapeutically with these kids in their programs does not align with what you would do. And they say that they take their cue from you. You know, it didn't go anywhere. But I will say that just last year, I met a mom who has a son a similar age, and he had been at that same residential in a different program, and his therapist did listen about FASD. And she really had a better experience with getting staff to listen to it and sort of at least be flexible in what they were doing, keeping that brain function in mind. So it's interesting because they were at the same place, but different units. So at that point, we ended up finding a place out of state where he went for about 5 months. And then he came back to Illinois because he was discharged from the other place out of state. And we had to go to court a couple times. So after all of this, you know, stress of juvenile court, where we'd been many times for our son, now we're dealing with court of a different kind because we're trying to force, finding an appropriate placement and funding, and keeping him at the first place until we found another place. So that was really stressful. And actually, there's a great lawyer in Chicago. His name's Matt Cohen, and he has a very helpful website because all he focuses on are helping people with disabilities. And so he was really great, and he is very passionate about, no, they have rights, and these are what kids need. And so one of the cases I'm allowed to talk about because their lawyer forgot to put a confidentiality clause. The other case I'm not allowed to talk about in the terms of the agreement. But yeah, it was just more, you never thought, like when you decide to become parents, you never thought, whoa, I know way more about all of these things than I ever wanted to know or thought I needed to know. Even with the background in social work where I had planned on being a practitioner, I had no idea what was really going on.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
So, Michelle, I agree so much that you're doing and I'm doing currently. We would have never imagined that this would be what we would be doing, but yet there's that passion, right? Because we know we're advocating for our kids and then so many other families as well. I know along the journey you became a facilitator of the Facets neurobehavioral model. What led to that?
Well, first, I think it was around the time that my son first was in residentials, and I was looking around and I found Jeff Noble online. And it happened to be right when he was about to start his next cohort of the caregiver kickstart. And so I was thinking about it, and Jeff will still laugh to this day because the emails I sent him were quite long. And I was just convinced that no, I shouldn't join it because I'm going to bring everybody down, because I just can't imagine like other families are going through these terrible things that we're going through. Little did I know. So I started that program, and there's so many aspects to it, and one of them is an educational aspect. So there are a lot of training modules about brain function, and that was very helpful. And I would share the information with my husband, and very much on those neurobehavioral model lines. So that was really helpful. And then there were coaching calls, and sometimes there would be experts, whether that be in sleep or IEP, that would be on the calls. Dr. Mella talking about his medication algorithm. And then there were coaching calls where, families would share, hey, this is what's going on. And they would try to help you brainstorm that, like knowing what you know now about brain function, how do we accommodate for this? And sometimes, it was really severe situations where it was more than accommodating. It was, how do we create a safety plan for this? And so finding that community, I really do think it saved me at that time, because I really felt like part of my soul was destroyed going through all of that. And I think that having that community really saved me. And so then FASD United was also just sort of coming into being at that time. And I think part of it is, the social worker in me, much as I try, it will not be contained. So wanting to do that advocacy piece, and talking to Jen Wisdahl at FASD United, she's like, you want to advocate? Let's get you on board here. So, and they were just starting out, and they've grown so much in just a few years. I'm so proud of them, and I'm so just happy that they exist. and being involved with like their policy calls. I'm there almost every week.
Yeah.
And having people who are caregivers, but then they also have some younger people who are not caregivers, but they're so passionate about it. And it really means a lot. It really means a lot. And then I thought, okay, if I want to go out and get this message out, the best thing for me to do is somehow get trained to be a trainer, right? So then I see, okay, facets, and you do the prerequisite course, which wasn't a lot of new information, because a lot of what I learned in Jeff's group was that neurobehavioral model, but it was some of the tools that they use, and then going through the facilitator, really getting so in depth into it, and really feeling comfortable talking about it, and knowing like, yes, if I start talking about this and people say, we've never heard of that, you're crazy, like I still feel confident, I can back it up, I can talk about it. And then having a cohort going through it with us, most of our cohort were caregivers, but we had one person who worked at an agency. And again, just seeing her passion for it, I just so appreciated it. I just really appreciated having caregivers as well as non-caregivers who were professionals together. I thought it was great. And I think what's also interesting is that Facets is not static. As you know, when we have like our monthly calls, it's like, okay, here's the new edition of the book, Trying Differently Rather Than Harder, that's coming out. And what do we think about this? And what are we changing? And also keeping an eye on what language is respectful. And so changing that as needed. So I like that it's not static. I think it's interesting too, because that model was based in fetal alcohol spectrum, but Facets is sort of maybe widening their reach and saying this works for a lot of other neurodivergent conditions. And so I think that's a little bit of a balancing act, because I think it's important. I think it's important for us to get recognized under that umbrella of neurodivergence. But I also think we want to keep that FASD specific focus as well.
Yeah, so important. And and there's also such an overlap with diagnoses, because I know even in our support group, although all of the families their kids have an FASD, almost all of us also our kids have an ADHD diagnosis, and a majority have also an autism diagnosis.
Yes.
Right. So whether it's the one thing, and then of course trauma, because they're all kids that were adopted or fostered. So it applies that neurobehavioral model is effective no matter what that brain-based condition might be, no matter where the root cause is.
Yes. And I think that, when you're bringing up the autism piece, that's very interesting too, because for a long time we would say, here's the prevalence of FASD versus what the prevalence of autism. And I think FASD United has been really deliberate in reaching out and saying, we're supporting autism awareness and being supportive of that, hoping that it's reciprocal. And I know just here in I have a little town, but our school district is pretty big. There are the parent Facebook groups. And so one of the special needs parents groups, a lot of them have kids who have autism diagnoses or are in autism programs at our school. And so they'll post a lot about that. And then I will sometimes post about FASD, and I will say it has been welcomed and it has been encouraged by the admins of the group. They'll say, hey, if you want to cross post here, like go ahead and do that. And so, or they'll always put a thumbs up if I post something. And since now we're right at the beginning of FASD Awareness Month, of course, I'm going to be posting a few times on those groups. And I do talk about it at our local school board meetings, because we have a pretty big autism program in our district. But I say, hey, here's what the prevalence are. And I always try to bring some new study, because I don't want to just repeat. I say, I'm always trying to bring you new information. And one of the things is there was a study that was published just in May, and it was talking very specifically about the increase in alcohol consumption between just February and November of 2020. So during that early pandemic time.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. It was like an increase of 323% for moms who had kids between the ages of 0 and 5.
Wow.
And then it sort of broke it down for other things, and actually like how many billions of drinks more were consumed during that time. So at the board meeting this month, in August, I said, why am I bringing you this data from 2020? Well, because our entering kindergartners this year and next year were born during that time. So you may see an increase in behaviors, and at first not be able to recognize that for what it is. So I think that, that comes into play. And I I also think it's very interesting given, you know, FASD is a very bipartisan issue. We want to keep it that way, but you also have to pay attention to what's going on in the federal government. And there is a focus on autism, probably not where it needs to be, but
Right.
what's the cause of it? What's the cause of it? And I feel like they're always missing this piece where some of it is a misdiagnosis that
Yes.
could actually be FASD. And there have been, you know, even articles recently in the New York Times where they say something is driving this increase in autism diagnoses. It's not vaccines, but what is it? And they'll come up with other things. And one of the things, of course, is increased expanding the diagnostic criteria and greater detection of autism and including more. Of course, that's part of it. There might be a contribution biologically where they say, you know, people are having babies at older ages. And so particularly with the paternal contribution, that older paternal age could maybe be contributing to that increase, but it doesn't explain all of it. And I want to scream every time.
Yes.
Stating and it explains all of it, but there's definitely a piece that you all are missing. And how are you still missing it? And even when they're talking about, you know, there's been some stuff in the news about, okay, increased drinking is resulting in these health issues later down the line, where it's, you know, a cancer or a heart disease or diabetes or these things. And they always miss fetal alcohol spectrum. I don't understand how that is continually left out. So if we could be a part of the conversation just as automatically as all those other things, I think that would go a long way towards destigmatizing it, towards destigmatizing.
Yeah, we need a seat at the table, right? As FASD United is telling us. So, so many of our listeners are adoptive and foster parents. So we know that the professionals, the justice system, you know, the government, people just they're missing it. So why is it so important, do you think, that parents, especially foster and adoptive parents, understand FASD, have some training, know the symptoms?
So that mostly so that they can, well, equally to support their kids in a way that's more effective. And I think, you know, a lot of what you learn when you go through like a Jeff Noble and also Facets, it's not about trying to change the individual.
Right.
It's about changing the way that we view it and the way that we react to it. And it doesn't mean, oh, that's the magic wand, because there are still going to be behaviors, and some of them are going to be awful and challenging, and some of them not so much, but they're going to be things that feel like a lot because they impact you every single day as a family. But then, you know, we change how we have to sort of let go of some of the things, like the value shift. I think the value shift is huge. And I think that's part of the issue when you bring it to justice or educators, is we don't realize how stuck in the values we are, especially accountability. Everybody must have accountability. Well, accountability can look different. And if accountability isn't leading to the change that you want, then what good is it? All it does is make us feel better that we imposed a consequence, but nobody's learning from it. Nobody's getting any better from it. So I think that shift that we have inside ourselves is very important for adoptive and foster parents. And it might feel at first like you're giving up control, but you're not, you know, but you really have to practice it. And it's not, I don't feel like it's something where you can just go and get training one time. I feel like you need continued support.
Yes.
Because it's very easy. You might think like, yeah, that makes sense. But then when you're around, oh, your school team or somebody in the justice system or the child welfare workers who are supposed to be supporting you, if they don't understand it and they try to talk you out of it and say, no, he needs this and you need to be, you know, stricter and you need to have this and you need to do these, it's easy to get sucked back into that. You know, you need that constant support to say, no, you're not crazy. You've learned this new way, and yeah, you should continue going down that path. And like I said, it's also a measure of acceptance, because just going down a different path and doing things differently, it's not going to result in magical, everything's fine. So that piece of it, supporting your kids and sort of making yourself a little saner, but also to advocate for them. But then you're also helping them learn to advocate for themselves. And I think that's the important piece of it too. And I know with my son, talking about, hey, these are what, some of the test results are, and we believe that you were likely exposed to alcohol prenatally. You always worry, are they going to have anger towards the birth mother? And then if so, how are you going to help them manage that? But I think for my son, I think it definitely helped him understand I'm not stupid, because he would call himself stupid.
Mhm.
You didn't make a great decision here, and probably your brain was working in this way, and not, here's what might be helpful. And he's resistant sometimes, right? Resistant, that word they like to use. Treatment resistant, no. But hasn't come around to it yet. The older that he gets, and the more there's some maturity, a little maturity bump here, a little bit there, he understands that. It's very interesting to me too, because he will easily see it in other situations. And this, I think, is another common trait, the lack of insight for self. Now, you're going to have that with any adolescent, but probably more so with somebody who might be on the fetal alcohol spectrum. So he could easily, once we started talking about these things, it's interesting, but it's also heartbreaking, because of the residential settings that he's been in. He's able to say, hey, this kid had this behavior going on, and I think it's because they have this particular issue. But instead of responding, the staff immediately, while the kid's in crisis, would say, well, you have this consequence now. And that just escalated the kid further. My son is recognizing this. The staff who work there can't see it, but my son, because of the talking that we've done about this, he can see it. Can he apply it to himself? Not at that time. He could, and that's a thing too, is where they can verbalize that they understand, but maybe not operationalize it. And so, but you continue the conversations, and he actually, not everybody likes to, but he likes the opportunities to be an advocate for himself. So there are times where federal legislation was in the committee for the House, and I would say, here's your congressperson. Would you like me to help you craft an email? Yes, he's very interested in doing that. So I think advocating, knowing how to better advocate for them, but as they get older, helping them to advocate for themselves. And, there are some adults who are getting diagnosed, even in their 40s and 50s. And so knowing how to be supportive and, jumping on with them and helping them when they're advocating, I think is really important. And I also think it gives us, a little bit of pause in the ways that we talk about FASD. So some of the things we used to talk about, dysmaturity, right? And it means not immaturity, where you can act your age. It means not able to. And I think for a lot of us, when we were learning about it, it's a very aha moment, because you go, oh, here's what their chronological age is. And here is maybe the age that the person is acting at the time. And then you say, you know what? I have friends now who are adults, who are diagnosed as adults. Would I ever use that term to their face and speak about it that way? No. And I think that's one of the things that I like about Facets, as we are listening to the self-advocates and saying, why would we speak in a way that infantilizes them, when we could say things like developmental timeline and be more supportive? And so I think as an adoptive and foster parent, that's also another reason is to, you don't have to be perfect. You have to give yourself grace, but you can start learning about even how the language we use, the impact that it has when we talk about our family members.
Yeah, I know the whole thing with the dysmaturity. For me, it was an aha moment as well. Like, oh, there's a name for this.
Yep.
So it helped me to understand it. But then when you then carry it on to, am I going to call my child that, or my young adult son that, no, that's not very, not something that we would want to say. So I do love how they've updated the language, and it's definitely person-centered, person focused. So that is great. So Michelle, how old is your son now, and how's he doing?
He's 19. And so he is in a young adult program that he moved to in December, because he had sort of aged out of the place that he was. So when he was discharged from the place in Utah, there was like an emergency meeting of state agencies for emergency placements. And they said, okay, he can go to this place, which was interesting because I had just introduced our governor at that very residential a few months, like a month prior, when the governor was announcing this new transforming behavioral health care. And that's where my son ended up going. But again, it was a situation where he was, I think, the only school funded placement, and all the other youth there, again, probably like 100 or so, were DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services. And so we know the prevalence of FASD in general, we say is 1 in 20, but we know in those child welfare populations that it's actually quite a bit higher. So to me, when I would visit and I would see some of the other youth there, you know, all I saw around me was possible exposure prenatally to alcohol. And, you know that the staff that deal with our kids on the units day to day probably aren't trained in that. I was lucky because the head staff there were responsive, were communicative, really tried to help my kid, were flexible. You know, they're not doing FASD trainings throughout, which I'll get them there eventually, but they're responsive and listening to it. The psychiatrist there was quite good. They were able to help him have a job on campus through their principal a couple of summers. But he still had ups and downs. And when you have a lot of youth there who have trauma and possible neurodivergence, there are physical situations, you know. And when my son first started, sometimes he was the instigator, and then other times he was getting beat up. And that's really hard. It's really hard as a parent, like, your kid's not living with you, and this is, you know, he's been hurt. There were times where he regressed and had stopped going to school for months and months. And that can only go on for so long when you have a school placement before they say you can't stay there anymore. And so then that was another kind of stress, because all of a sudden, again, we were looking at what are the homeless programs for young adults that are out there. So now I know a lot about that in our area, and met some people that I think are really good at what they do, and who I hope to be in touch with again as far as FASD, because again, that young adult population that requires homeless services, a lot of them are DCFS again. So so my son kind of got back on track and finished his high school credits, actually only 1 semester late. And then he was moving to the new place right at that time. But the former place invited him back in the summer, because that's when they do their graduation ceremonies. And he was kind of on the fence, like, do I really want to do it? And I really wanted him to, for me. And I said, I think that you'll be happy you did it. And you know what? He was. And yes, it was good for me, but it was, more importantly, he was really happy to do it. And there were, I think, 4 seniors, and then they also did a group of 8th graders to sort of like recognize them and motivate them to keep going. And a lot of staff showed up and they clapped for him. And when we had been in Russia all those years ago, we stocked up on some things and held on to them for a very long time. And one of them was a pocket watch from Russia. And I'd been saving it and saving it. And so we went out to dinner after the graduation and gave that to him. And, you know, his face when he opened it and he realized what it was like, oh, that's cool. And then when he saw all the instructions were in Russian, he had a different look on his face for a minute. So that was like a very, you know, emotional moment to be able to do that. My son is actually very motivated to work. He doesn't like downtime, and he likes to earn money for sure. But that's almost secondary. He really just likes to have a purpose, and he likes to have his time, you know, not downtime. He likes it to be more structured. So he had a job for like a month at a Goodwill, and then they cut a few people. So it was sort of like last one's hired, first one's fired kind of a thing. And then he's been very into photography this year. And so he had a job at one of the Chicago skyscrapers where he was on that team taking pictures. But unfortunately, that lasted just over a month and he was let go from there. So I'm sad about that one because he really liked it. But you know, for him, at least right now, he's got that cushion. He's got the program he's in, and certainly my husband and I are here for him. So it's okay to sort of, okay, we have to figure out what's working, what's not working. He finds his own job openings. Also, his program tries to find some, but then he's got to interview on his own. And I think that's one of the difficult parts about him not living in our home is we're not there to help with that. And you don't really talk to the employer as you might. So it's kind of up to him what he wants to share and what he doesn't. And I will say one of the things that he's so good at that I don't think I would be as good at is figuring out the public transportation system in Chicago. So between the L trains and the Metro trains and the buses, or even where to walk from place to place, he's got apps that he uses and he's just like a master at figuring that out.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I would get lost. So
Mhm.
So you do so much on behalf of the FASD community when it comes to things like just understanding policy and advocating and the justice system and all of that. So to me, that's overwhelming. I've sat in on a few, I haven't been in a while, but the FASD United, the policy calls, I do want to get better at that. I am going to be at Impact Week next week. Will you be
Yeah.
there?
I'm still trying to figure it out with
Yeah.
my husband manage the schedules of the other kids. I really want to so much. I really want to so much.
Yeah. So just give us a little glimpse into your advocacy work and what you do, and even like what can folks, like everyday folks, parents, what could they be doing to advocate for FASD, people with FASD in their communities with their government?
It is overwhelming, like you said, and I think it's hard to do if you're just on your own. If you have any kind of community in the state where you're at, or if you're connected to your affiliate, the affiliates are really good about knowing what's out there to advocate for, whether that's on the state level or the federal level. Locally, you could start locally. Because I've gone to my school board many times, they do recognize FASD month. So the communications director will say, hey, send me some links. What do you want me to put up? What are some facts? What are some visuals I can use? And I feel like that's a great place to start is locally. Or if you are on, a parent Facebook group in your community, you can say, hey, it's FASD Awareness Month, and just like put a link to maybe FASD United. So you can start really small like that. Even interestingly, my twins, they're in high school and they had health last semester, and they're used to me talking about FASD, and one of them came home and said, Mom, look, I want to show you what they showed us about FASD. And I was like, okay. And she knew, it was kind of the old pictures of the differences in brains, right, for somebody who was very severely impacted by FAS, and then what a typically developing brain would look like. And I know the point they're trying to get across. We know that's very outdated. We need to have some updated information. I also know that they can't do a deep dive. So I think, okay, in the small amount of information they're going to have, I want them to have correct information. So that's that's on my list too, just within my school district, is to talk to the health teachers and say, hey, would you like some updated information? And here's where you can go to get that if you don't trust me. I am on my congresswoman Lauren Underwood has community advisory committees, and I know not all representatives do, but I am a member of that, and so they meet maybe quarterly, whether that be virtually or in person. But I think even more importantly is she is one that does town hall meetings whenever she's back in district. So for parents out there who want to just raise the issue, or if there's specific legislation we have going on, you can go to a town hall meeting and speak up, and you can usually get like a few minutes face to face with that person. For anything else, like if you want to contact your congressperson, I would say, just look at FASD United on their policy center, and they have contact information there. Chris Melfi is their person in charge right now, and he's really great. And he helps anybody. If you want to have a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, they are always there to support you. So you don't have to feel nervous. You don't have to think, oh my gosh, what do I even say? How do I get started? They help you refine it. Like, what is your ask? What is your specific ask? And in Illinois right now, we had a mom who went to her representative, and it's adjacent to my district. So this is on a state level, not the federal level. And she talked to him about FASD and the services that aren't there for her son. And he said, okay, I'll introduce a bill. And he based it on the federally proposed legislation. So that's the good part. He proposed it as part of a 12 bill package for youth and families. And I don't believe there was really intent. I think he was surprised when other parents and FASD United heard about this, and we jumped on and really wanted this to happen. Because when we would say, okay, we know this is getting called to the floor on committee, what can we do? Should we show up in person to advocate? And we wouldn't get a response. And then it became this whole political thing of, well, it won't get called to the floor because the head of the committee doesn't like that I'm against her on this other bill. And I don't know if there was ever a huge intent to work that
actually do something
bill through. However, I have relationships because of all of these past years with some of the state senators. And so I talked to the person that used to be my state senator, and she said, I will work this bill, Michelle. Like, let's come back together in the late fall and get it ready for the next legislative session, and let's work the bill. And, that's something that's sort of in concert with the federal bill. We want the federal bill to pass because then there might be money attached to it. I don't know about right now if that's true. But then if you have a program set up in Illinois or your individual state, you can access that. And it sort of gives you a framework to work off of. And even then I think, it doesn't necessarily have to be a state program. One of our agencies could take it on. And I like that idea because then you have a little more control and you don't risk, okay, they've appointed these people who know nothing about FASD to this program. On the other hand, if it is a state program, then I feel like you've got a mandate behind you to say to educators, this is a state program and this is what you're expected. To juvenile justice, this is what you're expected now. So pros and cons to that. So I would say you can just start small. And then if you want to, you can start having conversations with, state level legislators. And if you want to, you can talk to Congress people about it. And a lot of times there will be a script, like FASD United will provide, here's a template email. So you only have to change a couple of things like your name and where you're from. If you want to have an in-person or a Zoom meeting, you can decide if you want to share your personal story, your family story. So it depends how much you're comfortable with that as well. But there are a lot of help. There's a lot of help, I would say, templates or scripts that you can use. I will say also, one of the things coming up for FASD month is that September 9th, which is actually FASD Awareness Day, is National Congressional Call-In Day. So if you go onto FASD United and you look under their policy center, they have a script there for us. And sometimes when we're making calls, we're asking for, okay, this specific bill is about to come up. Can you please vote yes on it? This is just to make them aware and keep FASD in the conversation. And in the past few years, FASD United has done such an excellent job of, now people are aware of it on Capitol Hill. People don't say, what are you talking about? Like, they know it. And they have a lot of relationships. And so that's a really positive thing that's happened, like being in the conversation, just being in the conversation. And then we have a foot in the door.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this episode will air just after the 9th. However, we will put in the show notes a link to FASD United so that our listeners, if you want to learn more and get involved in advocacy and policy, that is a great place to start. And then if you want to know what in your particular state who the affiliate organization of FASD United is, that you can find that as well. I know in New York, we are my nonprofit is one of the two affiliates. However, because we're so small in areas of when it comes to policy and that kind of thing, we haven't done a whole lot. And I would like for us to be able to do a whole lot more. So I've been trying to tap into some volunteers who also have a connection to FASD who can kind of help us carry that ball too, because it's so important. One of my big, hairy, audacious goals here in New York in the capital region is for there to be a diagnostic clinic. Because right now, families,
it's Rochester, yeah.
you have to go all the way to Rochester. Last time I heard from a parent, they said it was like a 1.5 year wait to get an appointment.
Oh,
And
wow.
then last fall, a mom that I know took her son down to New York City. So we're in the Albany area. So they had to take a train down, and her son is I think he was 17 at the time. So how sensory overload and stressful just that whole trip to New York City would be, just to get the diagnosis, which he did get a diagnosis on the spectrum. So there really should be something more in the capital region, kind of in the middle of the state, to make it so much easier. So that's another thing that I would love to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can link arms wherever you are in your state, find out who your affiliate is, link arms, and and get out there and advocate in every way. But as we kind of,
I think that is the case in Illinois too. So we have an affiliate, and it's really just one person, and she is like a direct practitioner. So a lot of times, like, I'll take over the advocacy stuff in terms of like, okay, we have a call to action, and kind of try to get that out there to, we have like a very informal, it's supposed to be Chicago area, but we're kind of like all of Northern Illinois now. We meet virtually every month. And so it's an informal parent support group. So besides that support aspect, I like to also say, hey, we have this call to action. And then, of course, I like to try to give an update, like, hey, I asked you to do this. Now here's where that is in the timeline of things, and maybe what the next step is. And then we have a new affiliate, FASD Camp, which it's in Illinois, but people from all over the country do sometimes bring their children there. And it's only for like a week at a time. And it tends to be like 2 weeks in late August. So they're a new affiliate. And really, I mean, my goal in Illinois is to get a more united voice, because sometimes there's people working on things and we don't know it, we don't know. And we have Children's Research Triangle, but now we have sort of more towards Western Illinois, we have Florissa Center, and their psychologist there is she is on it. She is on the diagnostics. She is on wanting to, advocating for things, and really doing a lot. So it's important that we all sort of find each other. I think that's one of the challenges. And especially in Illinois, it's such a long state, north to south, and we don't always know, man, there has to be something going on. It's, Central and South Illinois, where you have, you have big universities, you have the University of Illinois and Illinois State, and you think there must be something somewhere there too. But how do we all connect up and link up? And, one of the funny things is, when that representative in our state had sort of introduced the bill, one of the things that you can do is go online and submit what's called a witness slip. And you don't have to say anything. You just check, I'm a proponent of this proposed bill. And so I would go back and look and see who, because that's public, who had checked proponent. And there were some agencies that I didn't know were aware of FASD. So now I have more people that I want to, more on my to-do list, but that I want to reach out to and connect with them and say, hey, this is great that you're aware of it. Great that you're in support of it. Can we all stay in touch with each other? And I think that's, Sandra, I don't know if your listeners, they probably don't know this, but on one of our facets calls, you were so generous to talk about all the things that you did to sort of get yourself up and running in terms of delivering, the trainings that you do and the support groups that you do. And, I'm not quite ready to do that, but it was so helpful and useful because it was very practical information about how to be effective. And I'll definitely be coming back around to you for that. But yeah, that's one of the things, is trying to connect, and get us all sort of together. And it is overwhelming for me, like, do I want to be the contact person? I don't know. So do I want to become my own affiliate? Do I go in with one that's already here?
Mhm.
Do I have a separate not-for-profit if I go out training? But it's really hard for me to decide, all my kid stuff comes first. And then do I educate because I have that facets facilitator training, or am I advocating? They often go together,
Yeah.
but really, how do you divide your time? And one of the things that I think would be really amazing is that we have so many colleges and universities in this Northern Illinois area. I would love to go around to all of them and pick the majors, education, nursing, social work, criminal justice, and say, you're going to be working with populations that probably are undiagnosed on the fetal alcohol spectrum. Let's talk about
Mhm.
how you might recognize that, and then how you might intervene differently, because I feel like that's the best chance to bring FASD awareness,
Yes.
to the child welfare workers, to the mental health professionals, to the juvenile justice system. And I feel like I could go around to those majors in all the colleges and then start back over again the next year. And just doing that alone would take
Yeah.
a full time.
And even in that college setting where the students, there's a lot of binge drinking on college campuses, you could plant that seed to, so you'd be doing a little bit of prevention work as well as advocacy and
Yes.
education. So, and I think we all have our strengths, right? We know kind of our strengths and where we're called to. And I know for me, my audience, fellow adoptive and foster parents, especially moms, I become just so passionate about informing and educating and encouraging them. That's kind of my focus with my training and the coaching and the support group. Whereas I'm kind of not so, I don't know if the policy stuff, but is my area of expertise, but you certainly have, that's the direction that you've been led in. That's your experience. So I just say, follow that lead, right? Go where God has kind of called you, because it's, he's given us those strengths and talents for a reason. So I know you'll find your way, and the community, the FASD community is just so much better off because of the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So
You say that, and I feel like, no, it's kind of catch as catch can, it's like a little bit here, a little bit there. And right now, I will say, in case you have anybody from Illinois that's listening, is we have a free FASD training coming to Illinois, and it is being given by Barb Clark. And
oh, wonderful.
she's
great.
She was, until very, very recently, the director of training at Families Rising,
Yes.
which used to be the North American Council on Adoptable Children. And she is one of the head coaches in Jeff Noble's program. She's got so much experience as a parent and as a trainer. And so there was a family foundation that got a grant. And so through that, she's doing a free training for caregivers and professionals. And it's a 2-day training. 2 days are in Chicago, and then 2 days are downstate in Springfield. So trying to make it available to where it's convenient for people to go. And right now, if you go on the Families Rising and you look at training and events and go to October, you would see those trainings there. And so people can register for that. And I'm hoping that besides being a great source of information, it will also be a place to sort of network and connect and get people excited about sort of uniting our voice in Illinois, and then maybe having some state programs. That would be amazing.
Yeah. So, Michelle, do you have contact information where, if any of our listeners, because of course we have listeners from all over the country, if there's a parent who has a child who's, either in or headed to, residential, or, some kind of program, or they're, getting involved in the justice system, that kind of thing, and they're like, oh, I wish I could just talk to Michelle, or about policy, or any of the above that we
Sure.
talked about today, is there a way that we can reach out to you?
Sure. So I'll just give an email
Okay.
because, like I said, my goal is to eventually sort of be up and running and have a website and all of that. But for now, Trager, TRAG, as in George, ER, dot FASD Illinois @gmail.com.
And we'll put we'll put that email address right in the show notes, so that if any of our listeners are just feeling led to reach out to you with some questions like that, we can point them in your direction. And just as we wrap up, knowing our listeners are foster and adopted parents. Many of them may be just starting to realize, oh my goodness, my child may have this, or my kid has this, and now what? Or my kid is now, has been arrested, or now we have court, or whatever.
Yeah.
Would you leave us with some words of encouragement for parents and caregivers?
Well, first of all, if your child is younger, I want to say you're so far ahead of where I was. And remember, I have a master's in social work and I didn't know for a long time what I didn't know. So you're so far ahead just by starting to question if maybe that applies. And then even if your child is older and you have known it, but you're starting to get into those secondary and tertiary symptoms, what I want to say is this: you're a good parent. I don't know if you feel that way. I don't know if you've been told it recently, but you are a good parent, and it is okay to be angry at the system. It's even okay to be angry at the situation and sometimes even at the person. We're human. We can't help it. Just recognizing that, letting yourself, okay, in this moment, this is how I am, and then you'll be able to sort of move on. It doesn't mean you're still not incredibly sad or possibly having some trauma from whatever it is that you're dealing with. But you're a good parent, and the fact that you can think about this and say, okay, it is a brain function issue. We have to think about brain function. It doesn't mean you're not mad. It doesn't mean you don't get depressed over it. It just means that you're able to look at it from a little bit different lens. And right now, you can see my Zoom background that I'm talking to Sandra on. It's for FASD month. But a lot of times when I'm on Zoom, there's a picture of the Northern Lights, and it's not sort of the generic one that comes with it. It's one that I took with my phone camera. And the reason I picked it is I live outside Chicago, Northern Illinois. So the Northern Lights are not a common sight. But several months ago, they were far enough south that you could possibly see them. When I went out my back door in the dark of night, I didn't see anything. When I held up my camera and I looked through the camera lens, the camera was picking up all the pinks and green.
Wow.
And so I took that picture and I thought, wow, this really reminds us that sometimes we just need to look through a different lens, and then we'll see what's really there. And so I think back to that and I think, wow, I couldn't have asked for like a better, just real life moment that was actually something beautiful, to illustrate that concept of sometimes you just have to look through it a different lens, and then you'll see things that you didn't realize. So I would say that too, but I really just want to leave them with the idea that you are good parents. If you're listening to this podcast, you're a good parent. You're trying to get support, you're trying to get information, and I don't think we feel that enough, and I don't think that we hear it enough.
Oh, well, Michelle, thank you so much. And thank you for all that you are doing on behalf of the FASD community right in your own state, but I know it also has national ripples out there. So thank you. I hope to see you in DC when we travel there. And again, thanks for being on the show and sharing your story.
Thank you, Sandra. And thank you for everything that you're doing and all the support that you're offering. And I want to interview you now.
We'll schedule it.
Right.
All right. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Wow. And thank you for listening to this FASD Awareness Month episode. I don't want you to be scared off because I know Michelle she has an incredible story. Her family has been through so much. And I just want to say that it does not have to go down that road. A lot of what her family has experienced, and she mentioned tertiary symptoms. And let me just tell you, the tertiary symptoms of FASD are things like criminal justice system involvement, alcohol and drug use addiction, social services involvement, legal system involvement, and even suicide. Way back when my boys were first diagnosed with FASD when they were 6 and 8, when I went online to find out more about fetal alcohol syndrome, these were the things that were presented like, this is where you're headed. And it was frightening and it was hopeless. And I refused to receive that. And so we don't have to go there. When we can recognize FASD And if you're listening to this podcast, if you've been listening for a while, you are familiar. We talk about it all the time. The primary symptoms, a lot of what Michelle talked about today. So the sensory processing, nutrition problems, that intense sugar craving, language and communication challenges, slower processing pace, information processing. When they're hearing things, we ask them a question and they don't respond right away, or they say, huh, or no, and then come back with an answer. Learning and memory challenges, abstract thinking, difficulty understanding the concepts of money and time management, executive function, where like difficulty with planning and organizing and linking cause and effect and not learning from consequences, not being able to like set goals and then work the steps towards meeting that goal, controlling impulses, controlling like that self-regulation, focus and attention and short-term memory. When all of those things are coming into play, or I should say that anybody with an FASD, they may have some of those symptoms. They may have them in varying degrees. They may have them in different ages and stages. The older they get, it might become more obvious. But they're not going to have, a person with FASD doesn't necessarily have all of those symptoms. I always say that my boys do, and they have the diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome, which is the most like extreme level of FASD. So when you can recognize that these symptoms, these are behaviors, but the behaviors are really symptoms of the fact that their brain works differently because of that prenatal alcohol exposure. When we don't recognize that and we insist on issuing consequences and issuing, trying to do the sticker charts and the behavioral system things and all of that, and we just insist if they try harder, if they do a better job, if they apply themselves, if they stop being lazy, if they just cared, if blah, 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 whatever we say, not understanding their brain works differently and they need some support and accommodations. When we don't understand that, then over time, when we keep setting our expectations at what we think they should be able to do, we could see those secondary symptoms, which Michelle did mention that she was seeing in her son. And I've seen some of these in my own kids. So they fatigue easily. They become very anxious and irritable and overwhelmed and argumentative, and they can suffer from depression and frustration and anger and have poor self-esteem and problems at home and problems at school. So those are secondary when the primary symptoms are not recognized, understood, and supported. And if we continue to not understand and support and accommodate, when these secondary symptoms develop, over time, we have what can be called a chronic poor fit. It is not working, right? And we end up with tertiary symptoms. And tertiary are the things that I just listed. And there can be, criminal justice system involvement, social services involvement, legal system, all of those really hard, difficult things can come into play. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you're listening to this podcast and you're learning, this is where you need to get some of that training to understand how you can parent differently. It's that different lens. It's that paradigm shift. Our kids are not giving us a hard time. They are having a hard time. Their brain works differently. FASD is a lifelong physical disability that affects the brain and the body. And just like any disability, there needs to be considerations and supports and accommodations. And that's what we teach, right? That's what we teach through the Facets neurobehavioral model. It's what I teach in all of the classes that I teach online and in person. And when I speak, it's what I do in coaching and our support group, our Hope for the FASD Journey support group. That's a foundational part of what we teach there. So if you find that, any of this information is resonating with you, reach out, send me an email. My email and our website are in the show notes. If you have a specific question or struggles with the criminal justice system, your kiddo has been in legal trouble, or you're wondering about, what about residential? What about, these group homes and things like that Michelle was talking about? We will put her email in the show notes as well, so you can reach out to her directly. But you don't have to go it alone. It doesn't have to be worst case, hopeless outcomes. There is hope for our kids. And if you're listening to this podcast, you are on your way to that hope, because you're learning and you're so far ahead of the game when you already know what you already know, which, as Michelle and I both said way back in the day, we did not know any of this. And we learned the hard way. And sometimes the harder way is even harder than we realize it's going to be, but it doesn't have to be that way. So please, please, please go to the show notes. I have a free 1-hour FASD training coming up this month and in October as well. I offer the 3-hour. We have a big 5-week. It's once a week for 5 weeks. Online training coming up where we go right through the neurobehavioral model. That's you can register for that now online. Go to our website, justicefororphansny.org. Just click on the circle that says Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and you'll get to all of those resources. I also just released my latest blog post. You can find there. It's a back to school blog post, so you'll want to hear about that. And especially if you have a kiddo with FASD, what does that look like? So check all of those out. I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast. Tell your fellow fostering and adopting friends about this podcast. We are on YouTube if you want to watch the podcast, and that is at the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. All of our podcasts, the video version is there. Find us on social media at the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. And if you made it this far today, wow, way to go. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I am grateful to have you along for the journey. See you next week for our next FASD month episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.